Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on a deeper dive into nuclear energy safety and waste management. My name is Neil Challant. I'm an Assistant Deputy Minister with the Ministry of Affordability and Utilities, and I'll be helping to guide through the session today. This webinar is a follow-up from our previous sessions and this one is intended to provide a deeper level of insight into the roles and activities of the agencies in Canada that oversee nuclear safety and manage nuclear waste. You may have attended one of our previous webinars that provided general information about nuclear energy, and if that's the case, welcome back. If you haven't attended a high-level webinar yet, you may wish to do that either before or after the session. There are recordings of sessions on our website, and that's at www.alberta.ca/nuclear-energy-engagement, or it's also easily findable in the searches. We'll also be posting this session online. So if you wish to watch them in order, you can log off now and do so. Or if you can simply watch them out of order as well, there's no rules to this sort of thing. For today's session, we're mostly going to turn things over to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and to the Nuclear Waste Management Organization to provide information on their processes, their mandates, and the roles related to nuclear safety and nuclear waste management. Before we do that, though, I want to let you know that the session is being recorded, and we'll make it available online so anyone who can't be here live can still access the information that's shared. All participants are muted to ensure audio quality remains high, but the Q&A function will be open. So we encourage you to submit questions at any time, and we'll do our best to address them throughout the dedicated Q&A session. But before we get too far into things, I'd like to recognize that we are joining from many places throughout Alberta, and this province is home to 48 provincially recognized First Nations, 8 Métis settlements, and many other Métis and Indigenous communities and organizations with deep ongoing relationships with the land. I'm joining the webinar myself from my office in Edmonton that's situated on Treaty 6 territory, which is the traditional land of the Cree, Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, and Blackfoot peoples. We also acknowledge this land as the Métis' homeland and the home of one of the largest communities of Inuit south of the 60th parallel. I'd like to acknowledge and honor the rights, histories, and cultures of Indigenous people, and thank you for sharing your time with us today. Now, moving right into it, we're honored to have guest speakers today and experts with us. These include Justin McKeown and Bartek Rzentkowski from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, and that's the federal regulator of all things nuclear in Canada. We also have Chantal Medri from the Nuclear Waste Management Organization, which is a group that manages all nuclear waste in the country. In addition to those guest speakers, we have members of the Alberta Nuclear Engagement and Advisory Panel who are here to listen and to help answer questions at the end of the session. Now, without further ado, we'll kick things off this morning with opening statements from our Parliamentary Secretary and Member of Legislative Assembly, Chantal de Jong, who's leading Alberta's government's engagement and will share opening remarks. MLA de Jong will provide a brief overview on why Alberta is exploring nuclear energy and how this engagement is unfolding for those who may not have attended one of the earlier presentations. I'll turn it over to you, MLA de Jong.
Thank you so much, Neil. Very good morning to everybody, regardless from where you're calling in from across the province. We appreciate that you're joining us today to take a closer look at nuclear energy safety and waste management. And thank you as well to those who attended our earlier webinars and expressed interest in these particular topics. And this is something that we've heard consistently throughout our earlier phases of engagement, that when it comes to nuclear energy, these two topics are of great interest, and that's what we've heard across the province. So thank you for participating in either those webinars or the surveys that kicked off our nuclear engagement. So to address these topics, we're so pleased to have the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission and the Nuclear Waste Management Organization with us this morning. And I hope that the presentations that they have for you today and the Q&A afterwards will answer any questions that you might have. But just before I turn things over to our expert speakers, I just want to share a brief overview of our engagement and why we're exploring the potential of nuclear energy in Alberta. And I will say, for those that were part of our earlier webinars, this information would have been provided to you then, so it will sound familiar. And then we'll turn it off to our experts and we'll dive into these very interesting topics. So, nuclear energy offers the opportunity for us to diversify our energy resources in a world that every day is becoming increasingly reliant on electricity. And that's just the reality our province faces. And we need to make sure that we're ready to meet growing electricity demands. And it's a very exciting time to explore this technology because we're on this sort of cusp of a technological revolution. And not only is energy security more important than ever, but we're seeing AI play a larger role in our everyday lives. And both play a significant role in increasing demand for electricity. So, nuclear energy is a viable solution to help meet our growing needs. It can power homes and our offices. It can help keep us warm through our lovely Alberta winters. Although I have to say, calling in today from Chestermere, it's looking like it's going to be a beautiful day. So, thank God for Chinooks. It also ensure reliable electricity that can fuel our growing economy. So with nuclear, we would have a source of energy that is capable of providing that baseload electricity 24/7, regardless of the weather, while helping us meet our emission reduction goals. Natural gas electricity, as it has in the past, will continue to play an important role in powering Alberta's grid into the future. However, if nuclear energy is paired with our existing energy resources, that includes our abundant and highly efficient natural gas power plants and renewable sources, we can strengthen both our grid and energy security for many years to come. So, beyond these potential benefits, nuclear energy also presents a chance to unlock more of Alberta's incredible economic potential. New industry, it means good paying jobs, means more opportunities for people and for businesses across the province. And I can certainly appreciate that all of this is new to Alberta. We're sort of starting on this nuclear journey here, but we're not alone in exploring this new technology, and that's important. Canada's nuclear power industry has been operating successfully for over half a century, and just within Canada, there is a wealth of knowledge and expertise to draw on as we explore this technology. And we have, we're very pleased that folks from the CNSC and WMO are with us today. They bring a lot of experience to the table and are world renowned in their regulatory work. So we have the opportunity to hear and learn from other jurisdictions like Ontario, Saskatchewan, and New Brunswick, as well as internationally. And that helps us learn about successes and challenges, and that can help us here in Alberta make informed decisions about nuclear energy. So thank you to the CNSC and to the NWMO that are participating today. And they can support us in the engagement and the province by providing that evidence-based information on nuclear safety and waste management. But it's not just external information sources and relationships that matter. It's also vital to hear perspectives and cultivate relationships within our own province. So in August, Alberta's government launched a province-wide public engagement to hear from Albertans, Indigenous communities and organizations, as well as stakeholders to gather their thoughts on nuclear energy. So at this time, we launched Alberta's Nuclear Engagement and Advisory Panel. And as Neil mentioned, I have the absolute honor of chairing that panel. And we have incredible folks on the panel that bring a variety of experience and talent and knowledge to the table, and many of which are joining us on the call today. And that includes the Honorable Darren Billis, Tim Boston, Stephen Buffalo, Dr. Rudy Churning, and Dr. Harry Vredenberg. So thank you as well to our panel members who are on the call today. And our panel's leading the engagement on nuclear energy. So we're gathering feedback from people across Alberta, and that'll help inform a report that we provide to the Minister of Affordability and Utilities later this year. So our engagement phase is organized into 3 key phases. I mentioned earlier, if you joined an earlier webinar, you'll be familiar with this slide. The first phase started in the summer, included gathering input from people across the province about what their interests, their questions, and their concerns were related to nuclear energy. And the goal there was to understand what were the issues that mattered most and what topics people feel that Alberta's government should address as it considers the future of nuclear energy. So one of the first things we did was reach out directly to First Nations and Métis communities and organizations to gather input on interest in nuclear energy and the desired approach for engagement. And we also launched an online public survey and a request for information from industry, municipalities, and other stakeholders, both of which closed in October of last year. And we had more than 4,650 online surveys that were completed, and around 50 organizations provided a response to the RFI. So I want to sincerely thank everyone who took time to participate in that first phase, because that input really set the foundation for how we moved forward into this current phase and into the next. So where we're at now in the engagement, and that red arrow is there for your reference, it's focused on sharing information on nuclear topics that were identified in that first phase, and we're focused now on gathering input. And then the next phase is focused on gathering perspectives and feedbacks through virtual and in-person meetings and town halls that will be held within the upcoming weeks. So I encourage everyone to visit our webpage at www.alberta.ca/nuclear-energy-engagement, or you can just Google Alberta Nuclear Engagement, and I'm sure it'll be the first website that pops up. And you can stay up to date on our upcoming engagement opportunities. So I recognize nuclear energy is unfamiliar to many in Alberta, but I encourage everyone to keep an open mind. As a panel, our commitment is that we're here to listen, and we're here to provide open and honest answers to questions and to concerns. We believe in the potential of nuclear energy in Alberta, and we're optimistic about the opportunities ahead. And I look forward to continuing this important conversation in the months ahead, and also virtually with all of you here today. So I thank you for joining us virtually. So with that, I'll turn it over to our first guest speaker, Justin McKeown from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much, Parliamentary Secretary de Jong. Thank you to the representatives from the Government of Alberta to invite us from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to these online engagements to share our role as the nuclear regulator here in Canada. So my name is Justin McKeown. I am the team leader of the Western and Northern Regions team in the Indigenous Consultation and Engagement Division. I am based in Calgary, Alberta. And I'm joined today by my colleague, Bartek Rzentkowski. He's a senior project officer in the Advanced Reactor Assessment Division. And Bartek is one of our team members who helps lead the evaluation of nuclear power plants in Western Canada, including in the province of Alberta. Next slide, please. So the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission, or the CNSC as we call ourselves, we regulate the use of nuclear energy and materials here in Canada. And we have 3 guiding principles to help us do that. And I like to refer to those guiding principles as legs on a stool. If you can think of the CNSC as a stool, that stool doesn't function without those 3 legs. And the 3 key pillars that we have is that we ensure the protection of workers in the nuclear industry, the protection of people and communities, and the health and safety of the environment. Further to that, Canada is signatory to international treaties regarding the peaceful use of nuclear energy. So a key mandate of ours is to ensure that peaceful use through security and controls of nuclear energy. And lastly, we share objective scientific information. And further to sharing objective scientific information, we take in, we consider, and we incorporate Indigenous knowledge into our assessment processes, into our licensing processes, and we work to incorporate ceremony as well into our regulatory processes. So that's sort of how we function at the CNSC. Next slide, please. Of course, today we are here on engagement regarding nuclear power, but a lot goes into nuclear power. And as the nuclear regulator here in Canada, we are regulating the entirety of any offshoots and the entirety of the fuel cycle. So we will regulate the uranium mines and mills, which are located in the Athabasca Basin in northern Saskatchewan. We oversee uranium fuel fabrication and processing, so facilities such as Port Hope and others in Ontario. We have operating nuclear power plants in Canada. Those would be the Bruce Power, Darlington, and Pickering facilities in Ontario, as well as Point Lepreau in New Brunswick. Any nuclear substance processing. There's industrial and medical applications, which I think were referred to in previous online engagement sessions, and then other research, transportation, waste, security, and safeguards. So the important piece is that we regulate all nuclear related activities in Canada, and we are a life cycle regulator, which I will speak to in just a little bit. Next slide, please. So I would like to just briefly go over our licensing stages and speak to licensing requirements under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act briefly. So we do have 5 licensing stages for a nuclear facility. It begins with a license to prepare site, and that license is granted for exactly what is described. It is quite literally simply the clearing of land. So any grading, etc., tree removal, things of that nature, that is what that licensing basis will provide. Next, we have the license to construct, which would allow for the physical construction of any reactors or buildings or facilities that are necessary for the operation. Then we would move into the license to operate, and that is when a facility may start operating. And finally, we move to the decommissioning phase as well. And a couple of important notes here is on our licensing basis, particularly the license to operate. And in the context of nuclear power plants, these are long-lived facilities. So as a life cycle regulator, there is no precedent set in our licensing terms. Our license applicants will make a submission to the CNSC based on how long they would like an operating license, and we will take that into consideration at our commission proceedings. And from there, the licensee, if a license is granted, will be back in front of the commission periodically as their licensing terms end as part of renewals, and this is part of our ongoing work as a life cycle regulator. You'll see at the very end there is a release from CNSC regulatory control. I will mention that this is only a very specific case. This is the province of Saskatchewan does have a program and jurisdiction where we are able to release a facility from regulatory control. That's the only such place in Canada. At this point in time, other facilities would remain under CNSC control and oversight in perpetuity. So I just wanted to make that, that clear based on the slide that you're seeing. Next slides, please. So regarding licensing under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, there are requirements that a prospective licensee will need to meet. And a license will only be issued by the commission under certain circumstances. The licensee or the license applicant must be deemed qualified to carry out the activity that the license will authorize. They have to demonstrate that they will protect the health and safety of people and the environment. They have to demonstrate that they will maintain national security. And finally, they will have to affirm and confirm that they will adhere to all international obligations to which Canada has agreed to ensure the safe and peaceful use of nuclear energy. So when those conditions are met through our evaluations, that is when the commission would then consider granting a license to a license applicant. Next slide, please. We do have 14 safety and control areas, and these are technical topics used by CNSC staff to assess, review, and verify operational performance. So as a life cycle regulator, we will conduct verification and compliance inspections and audits. And we will use these 14 safety and control areas as the basis for those audits. Of course, every facility is slightly different. So some facilities have higher requirements under these safety and control areas versus others. And those requirements are commensurate. The details contained in these plans that are required for our assessment of these safety and control areas are commensurate to the activities that are being conducted under a license. And those are sort of the key points that I wanted to point out here. And if you can see on our screen, today we're actually going to pull out a little bit of information and speak to how we would regulate the waste management, the packaging and transport, and the radiation protection of nuclear facilities here in Canada. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Bartek to speak to these areas.
All right, awesome. Thank you, Justin. So yeah, as Justin alluded to, so I'll provide an overview here in terms of how we regulate waste management and the transportation of nuclear waste. So if you can, next slide, please. Oh, perfect. Yeah, so radioactive waste can be defined as any liquid, gas, or solid that contains a radioactive nuclear substance and for which there is no foreseeable use. So this slide here shows the 4 classification categories of waste that we have. So that is the uranium mines and mills, the low level, intermediate level, and high level radioactive waste. So for uranium mine and mill waste, these are the byproducts of mining and milling. So low level radioactive waste. So this contains minimal radioactive materials. These are such things used for routine cleanup and maintenance, such as gloves or mop heads or paper towels and protective clothing. So this type of waste is stored in bins and bags at a licensed facility. So the low-level radioactive waste generally does not require significant shielding during handling and interim storage. For intermediate level radioactive waste, this contains higher levels of radioactivity, primarily of used reactor core components and filters. Since intermediate level waste is more radioactive than the low level waste, it requires shielding to protect the workers during its handling. This type of waste is currently stored in above ground or in-ground storage silos at licensed facilities. The waste requires isolation for several hundred of years to decay. We will focus on the high-level waste on the very next slide. So as the name suggests, this waste generates significant heat and radioactivity. So next slide, please. So the high-level waste is mainly used nuclear fuel. We often refer to this as spent fuel from nuclear power plants. So in Canada, the used fuel is stored at the power station's site. It is first stored underwater in specialized design pools. So the water acts as a shielding agent so no radiation is transferred. So it cools in these pools from 7 to 10 years. It is then transferred to a dry storage in concrete canisters or silos. The middle picture here on the slide is you can see a depiction of what a dry storage container in one of our dry storage facilities in Ontario. Although the radioactivity of the used nuclear fuel decreases quickly, so by approximately 99% in the first 10 years, it will take about 1 million years to decrease to the original level of natural uranium. So therefore, a solution for long-term storage of used nuclear fuel is needed. Next slide, please. When it comes to the transportation of nuclear materials at the federal level, the transport of radioactive material in Canada is regulated by both the CNSC and Transport Canada. Other players like provincial authorities also play a role, such as vehicle inspections and sometimes on restrictions when it comes to the transport route. Generally, the CNSC does not regulate the route timings and frequency, as this is under the Transport Canada mandate. Our mandate is focused on the packaging of the nuclear material. Next slide, please. There are multiple layers to ensure safety. So we've got international requirements, we've got domestic requirements, we have specific licensing in some cases for the higher risk material. So nuclear substances must be transported in very specific packaging, of which there are different types used to transport radioactive materials, depending on the radionuclide, its quantity, its form, whether it's solid or liquid, and the risk involved. So the basic premise of transport is that safety relies heavily on the design of the package. So the design requirements for a package are commensurate with the risk posed by the substance being transported. with higher risk material requiring more robust packaging. So to be certified by the CNSC, packages must meet stringent performance criteria for shielding, containment, ability to withstand impacts, ability to withstand heat. Next slide, please. Now I'll provide an overview of in terms of how we regulate radiation protection. Go ahead, please. Next slide. So radiation is essentially energy transmitted in the form of waves or streams of particles. So it is all around us, and for the most part, it can't be seen, with the very notable exception of light, which is a form of radiation and is visible to humans. So an example would be smoke alarms lighting and then exit signage lighting. Not all radiation is created equal and can be broken into two categories. So the first is ionizing radiation, which has more energy and has enough energy to agitate an atom and cause it to lose an electron. The second category is the non-ionizing radiation, which has less energy and thus cannot cause an atom to lose an electron. So an example of ionizing radiation is gamma rays, so like those that are used in medical devices. And an example of non-ionizing radiation is radio waves. Radiation can come from natural sources, and human-made sources. So an example of natural sources are cosmetic rays from space, radiation that come from the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, such as bananas and Brazil nuts, the rocks, and the soil we stand on. Human-made sources can come from radiotherapy to diagnose and treat cancer. Nuclear power plants generate energy and can come from substances manipulated while doing research. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, radiation is what is released when an atom has too much energy and wants to go to a more stable state. So a major difference between the two types of radiation is that ionizing radiation can change the structure of atoms. So atoms are made up of three types of particles. Electrons, which are very small particles that have a negative electrical charge. You can find them floating around the outside of the atom. Protons and neutrons are quite a lot larger than electrons, and they are together in a nucleus of an atom. Protons carry a positive charge, and neutrons are neutral with no electric charge. We care about each part of the atom because when an atom has too many neutrons, which happens in nature, it can have different properties than the original atom. Atoms with extra neutrons are called isotopes, and some isotopes have too many neutrons to the point that they become unstable, and those are called radioisotopes because they emit radiation, emit energy. The process of releasing energy or radiation to get back to that better balance of protons and neutrons in the nucleus is called radioactive decay. We say balanced because atoms really like a 1-to-1 ratio of protons and neutrons in the nucleus. When atoms are going through the process of radioactive decay, the energy can be released in several different forms. It can be given off as alpha radiation, so protons and neutrons, beta radiation, which is electrons, gamma radiation, the waves, or neutrons. All these emissions will bring the radioisotope back to its stable state. Next slide, please. So in terms of regulating radiation protection, we often refer to this as the ALARA principle. So this is the ultimate goal of any radiation protection program. So ALARA is an acronym that means as low as reasonably achievable. The goal is to keep exposure to radiation as low as reasonably achievable, as this will keep the dose received and the chance of potential harmful effects to a minimum. Many radiation protection measures are in place, such as dose limits, personal protective equipment, engineering design, robotics, mechanical ventilation, to name a few. The CNSC has radiation protection regulations enforced under the Nuclear Safety and Control Act. The CNSC regulates all nuclear activities in Canada to protect the health and safety of workers and members of the public. The radiation protection regulations play an important role by placing limits on radiation doses to works and members of the public and requiring all licensees to implement radiation protection programs. When it comes to requirements of a radiation protection program, this includes the management control over work practices, personal qualification and training, control of occupational and public exposure to radiation, and planning for unusual situations. Next slide, please. The radiation protection regulations set limits on the amount of radiation the public and the nuclear energy workers may receive. For a member of the public, we have a dose limit of 1 millisievert per year from licensed nuclear activities. So a millisievert is a standardized international unit to measure the dose of radiation absorbed by the human body. So for comparison, if you live in the Edmonton area, for example, the natural background radiation in that area is approximately 2.4 millisieverts per year. This is more than double of the radiation protection regulation dose limit. Next slide. Yeah, oh yeah, that's it. So yeah, with that, that concludes our presentation.
Great. Thank you for that presentation, Bartek and Justin. Just want to encourage people, if you're listening along and you have an idea or a thought or question, please feel free to put a question in the Q&A. We'll get to it fairly shortly. But next up, we have a guest from the Nuclear Waste Management Organization to help provide information to one of the most common questions we get regarding nuclear energy. There's always questions, some variant of question about how is nuclear waste dealt with. And I'm sure looking forward to Chantal providing us with some information on how that's addressed in Canada. Over to you, Chantal.
Thank you. All right, here. You can hear me okay?
Yeah, we sure can.
Okay. I just seem to have lost the deck. So give me a sec here. All right, I have lost the main deck. I can't see the slide that's being shared for some reason.
We're all seeing the deck, Chantal, I think.
Oh, there we go. Okay, it got hidden as I was moving around my screens. Okay, thank you very much. Sorry for that interruption. And thank you for the introduction and for inviting me to speak today. And so, yeah, I'm really looking forward to having a chat today about what Canada's plans are for the long-term management of intermediate and high-level waste. I'll introduce myself briefly. My name is Chantal Medri. I've been at the organization for about 17 years. I have a background in radiation protection, and now I'm the technical manager for what we're calling the second DGR. And you'll hear more about what that is as I get going into the presentation. So thank you. And if you can click to the next slide, that'd be great. Perfect. Okay, so we all benefit from nuclear power. A necessary byproduct of generating nuclear power is to use nuclear fuel, which is what most people think about when they hear the word nuclear waste. So in Canada, after benefiting from 60 years of nuclear power, we have about 3.4 million bundles of used nuclear fuel. So if you stacked it all up like firewood, all of this used nuclear fuel could fit in about 9 hockey rinks. So if you put them at the surface of the ice to the top of the boards. So what is exactly used nuclear fuel? So unlike the depictions in comic books and movies, most used nuclear fuel that exists today in Canada is can-do fuel. The fuel isn't a liquid or a gas. It's a stable solid. Actually, it's a ceramic that's sealed into specifically designed containers and then bound in something we call a bundle. Each bundle weighs about 53 pounds, 24 kilograms, and it's roughly the size of a fireplace log, so you can easily visualize that. When it's removed from the reactor, the bundle looks the same as when it came in, but it's highly radioactive and it will remain that way for a long time. And actually, Bartek already kind of went through this a bit, but once the fuel is removed from the reactor, it's placed in water where the heat and the radioactivity decrease over time. After 7 to 10 years, the bundle is placed into dry storage. And this is a method that's been used worldwide since the 1980s. And so this approach is totally safe, absolutely safe, but it's temporary. So since it's going to take thousands of years for the radioactivity of used fuel to subside, what we need is a long-term approach. Next slide, please. But the nuclear waste, so we have other types of waste, and also this is something Bartek and I should have communicated and shared slides, but I'll go briefly over this too, because I did want to kind of mention these other waste streams. There should be, actually, if you could click forward one more time, there should be on this slide. Thank you. Perfect. So those low level waste, which is a little bit like everyday trash, and it's picked up a little bit of radioactivity. So it needs to be stored safely until the radioactivity naturally fades away, or until it's sent to these special disposal sites. And these are things like gloves, tools, clothing, filters, medical supplies. But importantly, these items don't have any heat, and they contain radioactivity levels that only require containment and isolated for generally up to a few hundred years. Intermediate level waste, these are things like the metal parts inside of a reactor, the resins that are used to clean the reactor system, solidified wastes from treating radioactive liquids. And these can come from power plants, research reactors, and medical isotopes manufacturers. So this type of heat produces minimal heat, very, very little heat, but it requires a higher level of containment and isolation, and for longer periods of time than what's required for low level waste. So that's a key difference between the two. And there's a very small amount of something we call non-fuel high level waste, about, we like to visualize it as 10 dishwashers full. And this comes from other activities like medical isotope. And so this type of waste generates some heat and radioactivity, and it needs to be contained for thousands of years, but it doesn't have the same heat output as used nuclear fuel. So everything here in that green box that I highlighted there needs to be isolated and contained for thousands of years. And the plans for this types of waste in Canada are for those to be put into a deep geological repository. And that is where the Nuclear Waste Management Organization comes in. Next slide, please. So we are the NWMO, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. So I'll spend a bit of time talking about who we are and the work we do and how we've come to be. So the Nuclear Waste Management Organization is a not-for-profit, and it's tasked with the safe long-term management of Canada's intermediate and high-level radioactive waste in a manner that protects people and the environment for generations to come. This is wording that we know like the back of our hand, protecting people and the environment for generations to come. And at this point in our work, we have two major projects that are underway, and they're both at very different stages. The first one is focused on building a deep geological repository to contain and isolate Canada's used nuclear fuel. And this, you hopefully have heard about it. We, in 2024, we selected a site for that repository. And as of January 5th this year, we've entered into the regulatory decision-making progress. So these are very exciting milestones for Canada. And then the other one focuses on the long-term management of intermediate and non-fuel high-level waste, also in a deep geological repository. But we're also exploring the potential to include future use fuel in the repository that will manage intermediate and non-fuel high-level waste, because we're thinking ahead of what might be needed in the future. And we're currently developing a plan to site that repository, so we're very early in the process. I'll talk more about these two projects later on in my presentation, but those are two major projects that I wanted to kind of introduce early on in the presentation. But you can hear we're essentially in the business of building deep geological repositories. And these are a solution for nuclear waste management that has international consensus, scientific consensus, as the safest way to contain and isolate wastes that require this long-term management. And so I'll go into more detail on that, as I said, but let's move on to the next slide, please. Okay, so a little bit more about who we are here. The NWMO is funded by the companies that generate Canada's used nuclear fuel. And our job is to complete the life cycle of the nuclear waste. So we were mandated through federal legislation in 2002. And after that, we opened a dialogue with the public, speaking to people from coast to coast to coast, to find out the values and the priorities that were important to them in managing Canada's used nuclear fuel. And actually, at the time, this was one of the largest exercises in soliciting public input in Canadian history. And ever since then, we've been collaborating closely with municipal and Indigenous communities, industry regulators, and at all levels of government. So today we're an organization of about 270 people, that are directly employed by the NWMO, but there's hundreds more working as contractors to support community participation or the technical program or engagement work. We have leading world scientists on our team. We have Indigenous knowledge holders. We have community engagement specialists, and a whole host of other roles that are supporting our work today. And I have a couple of these esteemed colleagues on the call with me today. Next slide, please. So we're committed to dialogue. This is really at the core of who we are. Dialogue with Canadians and Indigenous people. It really is fundamental to the way that we approach our work at the NWMO. So from developing project plans and processes to the way that we carry them out, collaboration is really at the core of how we do our work. So we are constantly looking for opportunities to create for collaboration, for the public to learn about our work, and also for them to share their voices. And this is just really an important part of how we do our work. I'll say that collaboration outside Canada is also essential to our work. So that means that we are sharing our experiences and staying informed about developments in safe nuclear waste management methods from around the world, not only kind of thinking locally to Canada. Next slide, please. And so we just consider different worldviews and how Indigenous knowledge systems can inform all aspects of our work. So from decision-making, from strategic planning, and even to field work and human resources, and even to how we purchase our services. So it's through this respectful knowledge exchange that opportunities are created for Indigenous voices to be acknowledged and heard. So for example, we listen to knowledge holders when we walk the land with our experts in the field. We have Indigenous knowledge and Western science workshops. So by aligning these perspectives, we can improve the quality of our work on subjects like rock and copper and water. So we intentionally continue to align with insights from different knowledge systems through our work, with strong guidance from NWMO's Council of Elders, youth, Indigenous knowledge holders, inner siting communities, and the Indigenous knowledge policy that we adopted in 2016. Next slide, please. So in 2018, the Nuclear Waste Management Organization released a reconciliation statement that acknowledged the historical wrongs in Canada's past, and recognizing that the NWMO's ongoing involvement, collaboration, and discussions with Indigenous people. And then in 2019, we took an important step by formalizing our reconciliation policy, which I mentioned in the last slide, that recognizes the historical wrongs and the need to create a better future by addressing the challenges of today. And we do this through activities like respectful meeting and meaningful engagement with Indigenous peoples and communities, by providing cultural awareness and reconciliation training to staff, so anyone who comes on board, and then there's continuous training as we go. And then by publishing our annual reconciliation implementation plan publicly, so you can look that up on our website as well. Another thing we've done is that we've developed a reconciliation assessment tool. And this is something that we use regularly to review the documents that we write, the scopes of work, communication plans, anything that's really written to make sure that the lens of reconciliation is used to look at these and develop these documents. So we're striving to live out our commitments to reconciliation, and these tools are helping us to stay accountable to that. Next slide, please. So both projects that we're working on that I mentioned earlier, we're implementing with that they will safely contain and isolate the used nuclear fuel in a repository. And there's international, I mentioned this before, but there is international scientific consensus that DGRs, deep geological repositories, are really the best solution for intermediate and high level radioactive waste. And actually, Canada is among the nations that is leading the charge in this global solution. And nearly every nation that uses nuclear power is planning to build a DGR. So we are leaders in used fuel management in Canada, but also internationally. Our technical specialists work with other top scientists around the world to further do research on this technology and this solution. So we're driven by facts. Our research and design process is open, it's transparent, and it's accountable. Next slide, please. Okay, so you've heard me talking a lot now about deep geological repositories in general, but let me get into a little bit more detail now, and because you're probably wondering what they actually look like. So this is a diagram of what the DGR, a deep geological repository for used nuclear fuel, could look like. And I'll just say that we really are in the early stages of development for the concepts for the second repository. So it's built to a depth of 650 to 800, more than half a kilometer meters below ground. And as if you need a way to visualize that, that's much deeper than the CN Tower is tall. Our offices are in Toronto, so you'll excuse a Toronto reference, but I'm sure many of you have been to Toronto to see the CN Tower. Its design will rely on a series of engineered and natural barriers, and they work together to safely and contain used nuclear fuel. So there are 5 levels of protection, and we call this a multiple barrier system, which is essentially a defense in depth system. So so the first barrier is the fuel pellet, which you can't see in this slide, actually. Fuel pellets are very stable. They're solid ceramic, and they're made of highly durable baked uranium dioxide powder, and they're stored end to end in long tubes that are made of strong corrosion resistant metal. Then the second barrier is the fuel bundle, which you can see in this slide. It's made from highly corrosion resistant material called zircaloy, and each bundle contains a number of these tubes. And then the third barrier, also visible on this slide, is the copper coated steel container. So these containers are engineered to resist corrosion, and they're strong enough to keep the used nuclear fuel completely contained until its radioactivity decreases to safe levels. They're designed to survive under 3,000 meters of snow, ice, meltwater, in addition to 800 meters of rock and dirt and groundwater pressure from the surrounding clay. So they're extremely structurally strong containers that are also corrosion resistant. And then the fourth barrier is the bentonite buffer box that encases each container. So bentonite clay is a natural material, and it's proven to be a powerful barrier to water flow. It's very stable, and there are some natural formations that are hundreds of millions of years old that have it. So it prevents microbial growth, which also helps to maintain the integrity of the container over a long time. And then the fifth barrier is the rock itself, which protects the repository from disruptive natural event, water flows, and also human intrusion. And so really the whole point of the system is that we make sure that the used fuel will remain contained and isolated for the very long term. Each part of the system plays a part in making sure that that happens. And each barrier serves as a backstop to the last. So if one of them fails, another would be there to ensure that the dangerous material remains contained in the repository. Next slide, please. So in the next few slides, I'll be getting into more detail about the 2 projects that we have going. But before I do that, I want to take a step back, and now that you've heard about a lot of what we've been doing, and go back to the priorities that guide our work. These were set on or in our first engagement campaign at the very beginning, and they continue to shape how we do our work today. So what did Canadians expect from the NWMO and the plan we were about to develop? First and foremost, they told us that they wanted an approach that put safety and security above all else. This was a number one message that we heard. Canadians also emphasized that our generation should take responsibility for the waste that was created to meet today's energy need. So we don't want to wait until tomorrow or pass the problem on. Then they stress the importance of aligning with international best practice. And as I've described, we have been striving to do that. And finally, Canadians ask us for an approach that can adapt as we learn and as our priorities change. Next slide, please. Okay, so now I'll give you more detail on the project that is furthest along, and this is the Deep Geological Repository for Canada's used nuclear fuel. And we also refer to this maybe as the first repository project. Next slide, please. So NWMO launched its community-driven, consent-based site selection process in 2010. And we only ever worked in areas where at least one community expressed an interest in learning more about the project and exploring their potential to host it. So you can see on this map here that there were 22 communities that expressed interest and wanted to learn more about their potential to host it. But we gradually narrowed down our focus through increasingly intensive technical studies and engagement with those communities. With the neighbors and the First Nations whose traditional territories were potentially located close by. And when communities were considered this project, they were the ones that defined their own process for demonstrating willingness. It wasn't something that NWMO imposed on the community. This was something that communities developed and defined themselves. So we've worked with these communities for over a decade. And through increasingly intensive technical studies and social engagement, we selected Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation and the Township of Ignace as the host communities for Canada's future use nuclear fuel in November 2024. And so that was a celebrated milestone for us. A lot of work had gone into getting there and getting to know the communities and work with the communities. It was certainly an exciting moment for us. And so this is a site, it's a great site. It checks all the boxes. We know that it is a good site from a safety perspective because we've completed over a decade of really rigorous site assessments and technical studies. And the studies will continue. They will continue to progress and get deeper. So we are confident that the used nuclear fuel can be safely transported to it, which is another thing we were thinking about. And this is a process that will start in the 2040s once the repository is not operational. And the people of both communities demonstrated their willingness to move forward in this process. And this is something I can't stress as important enough, that both communities demonstrated their willingness to be hosts in this process. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, this was a very important decision for Canada, and it wouldn't have been possible without the leadership of the community and their engagement for so long. So now what we're doing is that we're moving through several steps. We're doing field studies. We're going through a full regulatory review that began earlier this year. And we're continuing to engage with communities and the public as we are all working towards starting construction and eventually operating the repository. And so there'll be the federal regulatory process, but alongside of that, Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation will actually develop and carry out its own sovereign regulatory process. They'll create a process that assesses how the project could affect their land and people based on Anishinaabe values. And so they will set the conditions to address any impacts to be complied with by the NWMO. And this approach really aligns with our reconciliation commitments, and we're really looking forward to working with Wabigoon Lake Ojibwe Nation as they implement their sovereign process. Next slide, please. I wanted to be very specific about the type of waste that was going to be included in the first repository. So it's 5.9 million used fuel bundles, which is the projected total inventory of used nuclear fuel estimated to be produced in Canada from our current fleet of reactors to the end of life. So this is the amount of fuel our host communities have already agreed to. Any increase would require approval from both the communities and also relevant regulators. Next slide, please. Just a quick look at timelines here. So as I mentioned, now that we have a site and that the regulatory decision-making process has started, we're moving through several steps toward eventual construction and operation. So one of the things that we're looking forward to soon is that a center of expertise is going to be built near the repository site. And the design of this center of expertise is going to reflect the local character of the community and the vision of the people in the area. So this will be a very visible presence of the project in the area before construction can start. And then following that, we're anticipating that we're going to be breaking ground in the repository in the 2030s and then beginning operation in the 2040s. Transportation, handling, and placement in the repository will take about 50 years to complete, and depending on the inventory used fuel that needs to be managed. And after that, the repository will be monitored for an extended period of time before decommissioning, closure, and post-closure monitoring. So as you can see, the timelines are very, very long. It really is a multi-generational project. And that's why we have to keep going. We can't step aside and wait for the next generation to start all over again. Next slide, please. Okay, now I'll shift gear to our the other project that we have, the other main project that we have. And this one is related to our new mandate for the safe long-term management of intermediate and non-fuel high-level waste. And this is a new project, as I mentioned, and it comes from direction from the federal government. So in 2020, the federal government reviewed its radioactive waste policy. And then as part of that review, the government asked NWMO, because of our expertise in waste management and our experience in engagement, to develop a long-term plan for all the wastes other than used fuel that didn't have a long-term storage solution. So the Nuclear Waste Management Organization launched another engagement campaign, worked with Canadians, Indigenous people, waste owners, experts to develop what is now called the Integrated Strategy for Radioactive Waste. And this strategy recommends, among other things for other waste streams, that a deep geological repository for intermediate level waste be implemented by the Nuclear Waste Management Organization. And then this strategy was submitted to the federal government in 2023. In 2023, the minister accepted it, which confirms that the NWMO would now be responsible for implementing this plan. And so this is our new mandate now, an expanded mandate, I should say. So planning and eventually building a second deep geological repository for these types of wastes. So we've been referring to this as the second DGR project, since it's a bit less of a mouthful. Next slide, please. So parallel to the first DGR, I have a slide here to just really be specific about what's included. So it will hold intermediate level waste and non-fuel high level waste. And as I mentioned, there's a very, very small amount of that as a result of this expanded mandate. But we're planning ahead. We're looking at the future and that there may be some used nuclear fuel that could also be included in this second DGR. And just because non-fuel high-level waste and used nuclear fuel are both considered high-level, we do refer to this project as the DGR for intermediate and high-level waste. And just to mention on intermediate level waste and non-fuel high-level waste, as used nuclear fuel is safely stored at an interim basis at federally licensed facilities. And this approach is safe as it is for used fuel, but it's not meant to be something permanent, which is again why the Nuclear Waste Management Organization implements its plans. Next slide, please. Okay, so a quick look at the timelines here, and they're less specific than for our first project, which really reflects the fact that we're much earlier on in this project. But where we're at right now is that we're looking for input on a proposed site selection process right now. And this is the process that's going to guide how we find a safe location for the second repository within communities that are informed and that are willing to host it. And really this process builds on what we learned from the site selection for the first repository. It's consent-based, it's guided by clear principles, it's shaped by more than 20 years of experience. It aligns with best practice, It reflects our progress in reconciliation, science, and technology. So we have the advantage of the work that we've already done in this field. And so in 2025, we actually started engaging with Canadians and Indigenous people to gather feedback on this proposed process. And their input is going to help us to refine and finalize the site selection process. Once that process is finalized, we can start implementing it in the late 2020s. And this work is separate, really, from the used fuel repository project that we've been leading since 2020. And the communities that took part in the first site selection process might choose to participate, but there's no requirement to do so. And the repository is only going to move forward in a location that's safe and where the host communities are informed and willing. You have heard me say this before, the informed and willing, but that really is at the core of how we do engagement. And so I won't hesitate to repeat it again. We do need a location that is safe and where host communities are informed and willing. And then construction of the second repository isn't expected to begin until at least the late 2040s. And it will only really proceed again once the safe site is identified, communities agrees to host it, and all regulatory approvals are in place. This concludes, I think, if you move to the next slide, I think that's my last one. That's right. Yeah. Thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure to present to you today.
Excellent. Thank you for that overview, Chantal. Lots of great information there, and really appreciate your willingness to take some time with us today.